Bye, Jaja.
All right, I gotta go. I thought you guys were gonna be together. I instructed you too. Oh, there's my mom. Hi, Mom.
Hi.
To the themes of this book, it really brings up, I think, a lot of the things that I certainly negotiate within my work, and approaches it in a way that's methodical, that gives you a lot of questions, attempts to give some answers. In some areas, there's a gray area, and you attempt to swim in that space, which is really exciting. And then there's some parts that, I read and I said, I don't know about that. So I'm excited about this conversation because I think it's an opportunity for us to dive into the themes of the book. And for those of you that have not had the luck of reading it doesn't matter, because I think it's shared in a really approachable way. So I think
sought to do, and what I think I achieved, was getting a sample of the various regions. But even regions can somewhat be sticky because I don't subscribe to this like North African, Sub-Saharan African dichotomy either. I think that's a false dichotomy, and I don't choose to ever, hopefully I haven't done that in the book, but I don't choose to describe Africa in that way. But I still wanted to touch on just some of the major regional nodes, and so there are about 5. And so that's how, and in some ways too, for better or for worse, the representation of, and we'll get in later into the conversation, the representation and proliferation of some of these objects in the West, there tends to be a higher concentration of origin in certain parts of Africa versus others. So there was a lot, and there is a lot, from West Africa, for example, whereas perhaps the stories in other corners of Southeast are not as prominent, just because of the way people and things have moved over the course of, centuries. But I did really try to capture North, West, Central, East, Southish. And the categorization of objects, I really put on my more commerce product hat as a product designer and as, the founder of XN Studio, and having to really understand and decide and determine, even from a, kind of logistical and technical standpoint, how to categorize objects on my website. And that's pretty much the way that I thought about how I would organize the book. I think we originally started out with 6 or 8 categories, but then we realized that some of them were complementary, and we could perhaps fold some into one another, and even then it was still a little bit of a, give and take, because the objects are not necessarily intended to be used in those ways. So, but I also qualify that in the introduction, that's also a major theme of the book. So articulating very clearly that these are categorized in the ways that we use them in the West or outside of their countries of origin, but pretty much just working backwards from the website organization and e-commerce organization standpoint, how the products are already divided on my website and how they're approached from the consumer experience.
And so that's sort of one question about that. How does the ethical sourcing framework think about the way that we actually describing these objects and how we're talking about them? And then I think from the editorial side, which you engaged with a little bit, is can we talk a little bit about how people can be a little bit more conscientious from an editorial or even social media, if they're posting that kind of stuff. Yeah. And really thinking about words having meaning, and how we use them to describe and deploy these items.
Yeah, great. I'll start with the second question first, just because it's super fresh. You just asked me. I think that from an editorial standpoint, the starting point is to just name the thing. I'm always shocked. And not in a good way, when I open some of the top magazines, as recently as an issue that will remain nameless, but when the suave and beautiful decor is listed in the caption, listed in the body of the article, and an African piece is not mentioned at all. I saw a Sanufu stool in a beautiful spread, and the Japanese lamp and the American this or that, like all were, named, and there was a source for it. But when it came to the Sinufu stool, there wasn't even a name, and I was pissed. And I'm like, this is just lazy. And I know these are smart journalists. Like, I know a lot of them. I went to school with a lot of them. Like, I know they know how to research. I know they know how to write. I know they know this day and age, you can Google it. You can reverse image search. So now I'm like, okay, since we're not there yet, I'm gonna literally give you the tool. And now you can't say you didn't know. You cannot say you didn't know, because all of us in the room are holding you to account and more. And so let's just start there, like name the thing. That's where it's, for me, not okay to say Africa. If it was like the African stool, that's almost worse than just not saying it. Just don't say it, just stop. So name the thing, and name it in a way that you name the other things. That's it. If we're talking about, cities in Africa, or a specific place in Africa, and Paris, don't say Africa and Paris. Say Luanda and Paris. Say Kampala and Paris. Say, Lagos and Paris. Don't even say Nigeria and Paris, because those don't equate.
Yeah. This is a side note, but in Dikembe Mutombo's obituary yesterday in the New York Times, they wrote that he spoke 5 languages. He spoke 5 European languages, and they listed them out, and they said, and 5 African dialects.
No. And then didn't even know and this was in the Times?
This was in the Times.
Not surprised. Of course it was. Of course it was in the Times.
And it said it was actually heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking.
And that's amazing.
5. No, it's actually it's so violent, right?
Violent, yeah.
It said 5 African dialects, and it was corrected to languages, but you can read in the comments. But I'm like, we really have serious work to do, because sometimes I'm like, okay, things have improved so much since when I was writing, so much. So sometimes I'm like, do people really? Everyone knows, people know this stuff. People, yeah, I'm always like, is there really a point to some of the work that we do? Sometimes I have those questions. And then I read that and I was like, wow, okay, we gotta keep working on this, because I think that, and I don't think it's done deliberately. I think it's that the hierarchy of knowledge, the hierarchy of cultures, that it's a notion that we all live in and we're sitting and breathe in.
Right.
It begins to come out in so many ways, and I don't think it's intentional always. I mean, sometimes it is.
Sometimes it is, but I don't always.
Yeah. But anyway, let's get to the artisans. Okay. So the objects that have cultural specificity, right? So something like the Sinufu stool. Right, but then you have Sinufu beds that are used in burials, and I looked up the price of one. It's $9,000. I was like, what?
Yeah.
I'm my goodness. And I read that you said you were saving for one.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm a long way off. Very long way off.
So let's think about the Sinufu stool, for example, or there was a couple of other things. Ignore that. I think the Bamun. No, that was interesting.
The shield, maybe?
The shield, and then there was one more thing that I really thought that had, the kuba cloth, the way that people, the ones that they're specific kuba cloths that are specific for categories of people. Peasants, us peasants cannot wear particular kuba cloths. So meaning civilians, right? Can you talk a little bit about these objects, and what does that mean when someone brings an object that has a very specific cultural meaning into their home, devoid of that?
Yeah. So that part I'm still grappling with, honestly, because for me it's almost gone beyond the point, and perhaps I do need to back it up a little bit, but we're now at the point where kuba cloth and mud cloth, also bokolan as well, are being counterfeited and mass produced. And so I feel like, for me right now, I haven't sat too much with that specific question. I haven't made progress with it as much as I would like to, because now this counterfeiting is taking place, which is completely undermining the value, the meaning, the economic return. It's completely, flipped the whole equation on its head. And I feel like there's an urgency in dialing that back and really, making it known that this is, these practices are taking place, and they're really, and the impact that supporting or purchasing the counterfeits and mass produced then has on the communities of origin. And so, that's more specific to the Kuba cloth, because it's also such a, visible and signature, although there are different kinds. As soon as I see like a Kuba inspired anything, I know that that's where it came from. But I'm also, reproducing Kuba cloth designs now in different formats, because there has never been, and there will never be a Kuba cloth wallpaper, because that's how it was never conceived of. So I have to sit with these questions too. And the way that I reconcile it is going back to one of your earlier questions, is telling the story, placing the artisan at front and center, and then also giving back. I've set up an entire charitable foundation to give back to communities that my work either originates from or takes inspiration from, and that's another part of my business model that I'm building out. It's like, okay, big companies, if you want to do this and that, and you want to reproduce, let's get some licensing deals happening. You can't just go around stealing people's work just because they're in Africa. And there's plenty of precedent from, the Pacific, or from the Aboriginal, the New Zealand area, Australia, where indigenous people there have successfully garnered copyright. And this is a conversation.
Mexico and Isabel Marant, this just happened, I think, last week.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you can't you can't do that, but there hasn't been yet, although it's on the way, really an organized body, either in the respective African countries, but there's also a mechanism where, we in the West can come together as designers and as lawyers and then practitioners and say, actually, we're gonna pursue our legal frameworks here on their behalf. And we're gonna secure their licensing deals. And so if you wanna do that, Target, this is how you're gonna do it, and this is how much you're gonna pay, and then the money goes there.